Welcome to the Trusted Advisor podcast, where you get a deep dive into the world of financial planning with industry leaders who share their stories of winning and learning as they chart their path to success. This podcast is for the curious, those of you who like to dig into the detail, and if that sounds like you, get ready to listen and learn. And if you've been here a while and you're getting value from these conversations, I'd really appreciate you subscribing or leaving a review. It helps others discover the podcast and join the conversation. In this episode, I'm joined by David Sharpe, Chair of the Financial Advice Association and Principal of Globe Financial Planning. David brings a unique perspective as both a practitioner and national leader, advocating to government for meaningful reform in our industry. Together, we unpack the personal journey that brought David into advice, how the profession has evolved, and the critical advocacy work being done on key issues like the compensation scheme of last resort, direct ATO portal access, red tape reduction, and education pathways for new advisors. Whether you're a seasoned planner or just starting out, this episode offers a valuable window into professional leadership, policy insight, and the path forward for accessible, high-quality advice in Australia. Let's get into it. Welcome, David Sharpe, to the Trusted Advisor podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you on, Dave. We've known each other a long, long time. We're friends and we stay very connected to what's happening in the world of financial planning, and you, with your role as the chair of FAAA, means we are often talking about all things financial planning. You see it really up close and personal on your position on the board. But I want to go back to the beginning and really just to better understand your story. What inspired you originally to become a financial advisor? And we'll get to all the stuff about the legislation and your role on the board, but I want to start back at the beginning. So what inspired you to become an advisor, and how has your view of the profession evolved over the years since you started?
Yeah, great question. And probably like a lot of financial planners fell into it, right? So I've got three young boys, couples have come towards the end of high school, and they're thinking about their career. So when I left school and went into uni, I love maths, I love physics, I still do. So I went into geophysics, right? And hated it. Hated it because the maths was fun, but then like you can't talk to a rock, it doesn't talk back, right? So it's not very personable. So I sort of left uni after about a year and a half, realizing I hated that degree, went traveling, came back, knew I love numbers, I love finance, but my dad was a chartered accountant. Didn't want to be a chartered accountant because, my dad was. So I looked around, and as it was, did a finance degree, came out of uni and got a job in a financial planning firm. So I was sort of like, wasn't thinking financial planning per se, just wasn't quite sure what I was thinking. And really early on, realised I loved it. Hated the company I worked for, that first job, but loved the role and loved what I could do. And I guess it's almost as though that first job shaped my view of the profession. In terms, my view of the profession hasn't changed, which is we're that trusted advisor, excuse the pun, but we're that trusted advisor to help our clients make a series of smart decisions to achieve whatever success is for them, right? And so I don't see that in my view of what our profession is having changed. I still think that's what we are. However, I think the profession has morphed so that the vast majority of us that's now what we do, whereas I'm not quite sure in 2003 that was the case.
Yeah, no pun intended, but that's what it's called, the trusted advisor for us, because that is the role we play in the world of the client. So we weren't fond of having a pet rock or two coming out of geophysics, and decided that with the maths and physics background, your skills in spreadsheeting was pretty strong, and you're actually a good communicator as well. It's a pretty good combination for a financial planner. So hence your success in the roles. And moving beyond being a planner, obviously you created a business of your own, Globe Financial Planning, you've built a successful career and really wanted to take a step beyond just your own business and trying to contribute to the profession. So you spent several years now on the national board, initially with the FPA and now the FAAA. And I'm keen to know what originally motivated you to become involved in the leadership of the profession, and how has your perspective evolved in that time since you became chair of the FAAA?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how I started getting involved in what was the FPA, it was actually a mutual colleague of ours, Pippa Elliott, and you were on the state chapter with her. I think the rule was you can't leave until you find someone else. And she was like, Dave, I'm out, you're it. And so he sort of stepped onto the local chapter and had
a literal tag team.
Yeah, that's right. So I blame you and I blame Pip for that. But then, look, I'm naturally one who gives back. So I was on my old school board. In my 20s, I went and did that. I'm a junior president of the cricket club. So giving back to communities that I am passionate about is not unusual. And so being on the state chapter and helping run the events and engaging members, you dealt with, I guess, felt like head office back then, and always felt like a vacuum of, well, why is this decision being made? And that natural curiosity encouraged me to put my hat in the ring to be elected from my peers to get on the national board. I was lucky enough to be elected first time, which I'm told doesn't happen all that often. Was re-elected, and then, sort of stumbled, what a better word, into the chair role.
Yeah. And so how's your perspective on the profession changed since becoming chair? How has your responsibility and overview of what's going on in the profession changed since taking on the chair role? Has it been similar to being on the board and in the chair role? Obviously, there's more duties that you're responsible to undertake as the chair, but has that changed your perspective on the profession and the FAA's role in the profession?
Look, if I think back to my time, and I get a lot of feedback from members about what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, right? You get pats in the back and kicks in the bum, right? So it used to be a lot of kicks in the bums, not many pats on the back. It's probably reversed of late. And it's interesting, I get feedback saying, oh, you guys are doing this now, you never used to. And I think about my time ago, we've always been doing a lot of these things, but we didn't communicate very well what it was that we did. I guess in terms of being chair versus director, you're right, a lot more duties, a lot more time. From a pure governance point of view, your obligations as a director don't really change. But certainly now being much more, I guess, the face of the organisation in certain areas, along with Sarah, meeting with politicians and government and regulators. It's an important role that I see is, I'm not a chair, I'm just a practitioner. I try to put a face on the practitioner running a small business in Perth to the various decision makers that we have to see that we're not just some large corporate monolith. We're actually real people with families, kids, mortgages, and the like. And we are genuinely trying to make a positive difference for our clients and get that message across to regulators.
Yeah, it's a great role, isn't it? I mean, you're a practitioner, you had a great predecessor in Marissa Broom. And so the actual person in the trenches giving advice, seeing clients, is actually sitting there as a chair and representing the profession and advocating for the profession and the clients we serve. And so let's talk about advocacy. You just talked about politicians and the role you play in helping them to understand the important work that we do and appreciate the challenges we face in sometimes delivering that work. So how does the FAAA ensure the voices of advisors across the country are heard at the highest levels of government?
Look, great question. And the hardest part of that is actually understanding what the voice is, right? So you get a lot of feedback from members saying, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Now, we engage with our members a lot, probably to the point where it's oversaturation. It's, another survey, another question, give us that feedback. But we genuinely want to know, because the key objective is to represent the interest of our members. And we're unashamedly an association of members. So, whether it's be surveys like we have had just for DBFO2, we've got a committee which is made up of practitioners. The board is majority practitioners. And sometimes you get issues like CSLR where the membership is united, right? I haven't had a member come to me and say, no, we love it. I'd like to pay more than $10,000 for the wrongdoings of a listed entity, right? I'm yet to have that. So 100% of members. But then sometimes you get issues that are split, right? You might get an issue which is a third think one way, a third think the other, and a third just don't care. And that's when it becomes a bit harder. So, well, which position are we going to take? And often that's there where you've got to take a leadership position. In terms of, I guess, coming back to the second part of that question, which is how do we get in front of politicians and regulators, whether it's luck or whether it's been a professional relationship for many, many years, we never seem to have an issue getting in front of the minister or getting in front of ASIC or Treasury. In fact, there's regular meetings with ASIC and Treasury and various working groups where we're often encouraged to come in. Might be AFCA, but also it's other key stakeholders like licensees or other association heads that we are constantly meeting with the idea that if we just have our voice and the voice of financial advisors, that's one thing, and that might get some cut through. But if we get a unified voice across the broad spectrum, it amplifies our message, right? And so, something like a tax deductibility of advice. I mean, we drove it and we got success out of it, but we brought other associations on the journey with us to be able to make sure that, okay, the ATO heard that loud and clear, that this was something that we wanted revisiting. And when we work with other associations, we don't compromise our members' interests. If we don't agree, we don't submit together. What we do is we submit when we all have agreement. And if we don't agree, we don't submit. If we do agree, we do submit. And that's how it works. It's not as though we say, well, we don't horse trade, say, we'll give you this if you give us that.
That's a good point. And thanks for the clarification. That's the Joint Associations Working Group, isn't it? So you're essentially coming together with industry associations, professional associations that have a common interest in the financial services industry. And where you agree on a subject matter, you can present a united front and try and get consistency there. And the voice, that clear voice, one voice, through to politicians and regulators. So in terms of shaping that voice, it's an interesting point you made about the way that you need to kind of interpret what is the voice we're going to share here, because you mentioned pats on the back, kicks up the bum. The fact is that more taps on the back lately, which is a great credit to you and Sarah and George. And
it's a team effort for the whole board and the whole management, right? So it's not.
Yeah. And so I don't think the profession of advice, with the unity of the AFA and the FPA, has been in a better place in terms of having that consistency of who's talking on behalf of advisors across the country. So really, really monumental shift in that dynamic around how we are one voice now. And then obviously there's an interpretation of what is the issue. But with Labor now re-elected, what signs of political will do you see? We don't know the minister yet. We'll find out probably in a day or two now. We're talking literally on Wednesday the 7th. So the election was literally only a handful of days ago. So what political will do you see or hope to see from the Albanese government re-elected in terms of pushing forward with meaningful financial services reform?
Yeah, look, we have been told it's going to be a priority for the Albanese Labor government. We've been told that. So taking it at face value, we would hope that that's the case. And we're pushing for the reforms around DBFO, CSLR to get through. It's not always in politics face value. I know that's probably not going to be a surprise to listeners, but I am naturally one that if you get told something, I'll believe it until people lose that confidence, right? So in principle, we've been told that this is a priority to get through. A lot will depend on the minister, and they'll want to potentially stamp their imprimatur as well on what comes through. Obviously, former Minister Jones had put through some reforms, let's call them DBFO 2A, sort of like the first third of the package of the second tranche. And it's definitely taken a while to get to this point. I remember sitting in a hotel in the Gold Coast with Michelle Levy, as this is well before the recommendations were even put together. It feels like a lifetime ago, certainly a lot of grey hair ago. Look, but what I will say, and this is probably a big learning that I've had, the complexity of stakeholder interests are significant. And this won't be a surprise to listeners if they're advisors. We know the laws that we have are complex, right? You've got Corporations Act, which then talks to the FASEA Code, which then talks to the privacy, which talks. And so if you make one change, it has a flow-on effect. And I think that's made it hard for Treasury to then draft something that meets the intent potentially of the QAR report, now DBFO, minister's intent. So I understand why there's complexity, and there's also a drain on Treasury resources. There's only so many people who can actually draft the legislation for the minister to review. So that's all the challenges. But I guess I've put my hat on for the FAAA, which is I don't care. I just want to see a meaningful change for our members. So look, we will wait for the new minister to be announced. We will look to meet with them as soon as possible and prosecute the argument for our members. And we'll do so in a way, because it's not as though we're just trying to be greedily trying to profiteer our members. I always think what's good for our country and what's good for consumers is almost a concentric circle with what's good for advisors. I don't sit in front of the minister going, profitability is terrible, so therefore we need to do this. We're looking just as much from a consumer's eyes as we are our own, because that's what a profession does, right? We put our clients' best interests first. And so, look, we'll wait and see what the new minister is like. We'll be hopefully towards the front of the queue and getting to meet them and prosecute our argument to get things pushed through as quick as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're, as you say, prosecuting the agenda, but you're actually doing it with a view to making the profession more able to deliver more service to more Australians. And that is ultimately the objective of the government too. At least that's the stated objective. And so hopefully with political will behind it and a commitment to deliver on the remaining components of DBFO, that we do see that sort of opening up for advisors to be able to deliver advice to more Australians and not be impeded by some of the obstructions we have in our way at the moment. None bigger than the one you've already mentioned, which is the compensation scheme of last resort. This is one that I've been frustrated by because of the scenario you played out there a moment ago, saying that, no one's keen to pay an extra $10,000 for the failings of a business that has since walked away from its obligations and left the pieces to be picked up by the profession that's looking after the clients and doing it in a way that's actually in their best interests. So the FAAA has been equally vocal, or more vocal than anyone, and Phil Anderson's been leading the charge here, and I applaud Phil for being really strong and staying with this, and Sarah's been equally strong in everything I've read and listened to. So it is unfair treatment of advisors. No one's disputing that, I don't think. And in fact, I wonder even if the minister has, in private moments, confessed to that, the former minister confessed to the unfair treatment we're copying at the moment. Can you walk us through what you believe is a fairer, more balanced model and how that would look in terms of CSLR for advisors?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're up to about 35 recommendations, I think, what we sent through to Treasury to fix CSLR. So we see a lot of holes that need fixing. And some of those are, really simple where there's not a natural offset. If someone's claims through the courts, they can double dip on compensation. I mean, they're just simple things that should be easily fixed. And I can't see anyone having an opposition to it. I always say this, and I've been speaking around when I do roadshow. If what it was with CSLR was, hey, advisors, can you all contribute X amount? This is going to help run the organisation. And it just means that we're going to have an organisation or a scheme that helps remediate poor financial outcomes on the back of not just advice, it's a range of things. And your contribution is $600 a year, and that's what you pay. I think advisors would go, another $600, but we'll deal with it, right? I think where the unjustness comes for is we're doing the right thing. We're spending a lot of money doing the right thing, making sure our clients get looked after, and we have to pay for people who don't. I think that's what sticks in the craw. It's not so much the money, it's that element of it all. So I mentioned there's 35 things we've asked for, but if I was to focus on, I guess, some of the bigger ones, when this was first pitched, there was a $10 million cap on advisors. That was the subsector cap. And so we would like that implemented, right? So that's about $640 per advisor, depending on account numbers at the moment. And then, with the minister to make a comment that they won't go over that. So we're not going to get levied with it. We also think managed investment schemes should be in the compensation scheme of last resort.
That's been a clear issue, hasn't it, really? There's been some debate, and certainly the examples that have been in the press, there's a strong case to make that it's not just been poor advice, but it's actually been product failure that's been led by product issuers that have contributed to some of the failings. And at the moment, the advice profession purely has been asked to pick up the tab for all of that.
Almost all the large amounts have been a result of product failure, right? The obvious advice component attached to it as well. But if you were to say it was 100% advice, I think is wrong. And it's also, if you're an ombudsman at AFCA and you're looking at it and going, if I give this all to advice, the person will get their money back. But if I give it 30% to advice and 70% to product, they'll only get 30% of their money back. Now, there are some reasons why they do 100% advice as well, common law, but there is that natural tendency, which is, okay, I want this person to remediate, they've been wronged, and this is the only way we can do it. This is the only way they're going to get some of their money back. The problem is, and I've said this to David Berry at the CSLR, I see advisors as a victim as well of Dixon's, as an example, because advisors are the ones that are also forking out money to clear out Dixon's, and there's a range of others as well. We've done nothing wrong. We've acted in good faith, and yet we're still handing out money as well. So I'd like to make that point really clear. So MAS should absolutely be included in the compensation scheme of last resort. When CSLR was first brought in, it was supposed to be prospective. Dixon's and the behaviour was all retrospective. So why are we looking back at behaviour a number of years ago and then paying for it effectively after the legislation was brought in? In fact, I was lecturing at uni last year and I said to them, when you're in year 7 and, you're pinching each other's lunch or whatever, there's some wrongdoing then. You're now, if you become an advisor in 3 years' time, you'd be paying for that. And there's like the staff would look in their eyes, but that's effectively what's happened. We're getting these kids coming through and it's a cost for PYs and stuff like that for businesses, but effectively they're going to be paying for wrongdoing for many years ago. I'm not sure that's right. You touched on, walking away from obligations to that. Whether it's legally phoenixing or not, that's effectively what's happening, Close down a licensee, transfer across to clients, potentially the assets to another business, and then restart it, and away you go, and you can walk away from obligations.
It creates this scenario that you've spoken of before, which is this moral hazard, that you actually can knowingly walk away from liability, knowing you can actually just escape it by walking and leaving that shell company behind. The company is a shell and all the losses and the problems associated with that, and knowing full well the rest of the profession will pick up the tab and the clients will be worse off anyway. So really, we can walk away and wash our hands of it. As the architects of the failure, we can leave it behind and not have to be accountable for that.
Yep. I mean, you talk about unfair. I think it's unjust. And there doesn't seem to be any recompense. No one's been held to account that was directors or whatever at Dixon's or others. There's no one's been held to account yet.
I think you've rightly put it. As the financial planning profession, the number of victims has just broadened to include financial planners, to say, let's spread the load here and make sure the planners now end up being victims, in effect, to remedy the situation those poor clients find themselves in, albeit that the calculation's been applied to these losses was this but-for situation. But for doing this, they would have had this. And so it's one of those 35 things you've asked for to go back to simply restoring them to neutral as opposed to trying to compensate. Yeah.
Yeah, absolute loss is what we should be looking for. We're not here to indemnify returns, right? That otherwise, why don't we just all put everything in the Vanguard balance fund?
I couldn't agree more. Like, it just seems like just do whatever you like, because that's you'll get the cover that you need by simply taking any risk you like and know that you'll be covered for the growth that you missed out on if it all goes wrong in this other. It's just beggars belief, really, doesn't it?
If I was less ethical, I'd send my wife out there to make a $150,000 investment in the riskiest thing possible via an advisor. Yeah. And then if it didn't fail, then complain and get your 150 grand back.
It's just nuts. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So clearly,
I'm not doing that, by the way. I'm just
no, I know.
It's one of those things where you're angry at night over something and you just start thinking about it.
It can't be true, but it is. And let's hope, as the first thing on the radar that the FAAA has made on their 5 key points, that be the one that gets tackled.
Well, can I say 2 other things that we're asking for, Rob, with CSLR as well, because they're really important. And as advisors, we pay an ASIC levy up front to monitor and look after the well-being of financial planners and make sure our conduct, all that's underway. And then at the back end, when there's been wrongdoing, we pay for it as well with the CSLR. We know there's complaints about Dixon's to ASIC prior, right? And so what we've asked for is an indemnification of the profession. That if we go to ASIC and say, here's a problem, and they choose not to investigate, or they choose not to go any further, why are we then paying? We're paying them to do the job. If they then don't do it, why are we then paying when it goes pear-shaped to the end?
I love that.
So an indemnification for the profession. And also another one, which is, again, seems logical. If there are fines as a result of ASIC's conduct, that should go to the CSLR pool. So do you remember Westpac was fined about $100 million a few years ago? That went into general revenue. So there's a lot more work. So our levy went up, right? It ended up trebling. So our levy goes up. We pay for it all. And then when there's a win, it goes in general revenue and we get nothing out of it. So put that into the pot to remediate consumers.
Yeah. You talked about the term being unjust, and you're absolutely right. What's occurring here is unjust. But any fair-minded person would look at what you've just said there and say, that seems perfectly fair. That seems reasonable in the circumstance. So why would it not be that? Well, it's just because it's conveniently not that, because it doesn't serve the interests of the government, who wants to put that money back in general revenue and not offset the cost. There's no incentive to act efficiently and get ahead of these things before we actually pay for it ourselves through the CSLR. So let's move off CSLR, because we could talk all day on that one.
Yep, that's absolutely true.
It's been a real pain point. But let's talk about another one that seems to be eminently doable. It's the idea of providing advisors with direct access to the ATO portal. It seems like a no-brainer. What progress have we made on that front, and what still stands in the way of that happening, do you think?
What stands in the way? I think the main one is money, but it had a submission late February, I would say February 28. There's no opposition to this, by the way, and you're right about being a no-brainer. So there's no one, when the accounting groups are on board, I think the government even says, okay, yep, we can see why you would need this. And even if you think of the principle of the consumer data right, the consumer owns their own data, they should do. And if they want their advisor to have access, then that should happen, right? So from a philosophical, from a principle point of view, everyone's on board, and that's why everyone sees it as a no-brainer. Initially, if I was to go back a number of years, one of the issues was there's a structural problem around having 2 tax advisors effectively on the same record. And I think that technical issue around infrastructure and IT is what's holding us back.
Okay.
There's some cybersecurity issues and stuff, making sure that that's all solved. But I think the biggest one is the money required to invest to update systems. That seems to be the biggest issue at the moment.
Well, it's good to know that they don't have any philosophical or principal objection to that happening. And hopefully that's something that we can see with an investment in some improvement in systems. So,
and just to be clear, Rob, as well on that, we don't need rights to, it's just read, think about it as read-only view. We don't want rights to be able to make changes. We're still comfortable with accountants doing that. I just want to be able to go on and say, what's your contributions been over the last 5 years? What catch-up have you got? Or what non-concessions can we do? I just want that information.
Yep. View only is all we need, isn't it? Just those historical super contributions and the like. So let's get on to the big package. We've talked about so far, we're at DBFO Part 2A, so to speak. DBFO has seen a step in the right direction. How would these proposed reforms change the way you think advisors will operate day to day, particularly with the removal of safe harbour and streamlined consent processes? Because the safe harbour steps, the best interest duty, that's been a key part of this whole objective around DBFO. How will our businesses operate differently day to day if we do get the removal of safe harbour steps and the streamlined consent process in place?
I mean, look, we haven't seen what the modernisation of best interest duty is. It wasn't part of that package 2A, so we're hoping it'll be part of 2B. And so the explanation I'll sort of give out there just to the general public is, if I said, what do you think best interest means? The feedback from Joe Public will be, I think you're acting in my best interests. I was like, yeah, and that's what it should be. Like, have you been acting in a client's best interest? And I'm yet to find too many advisors that disagree with that, right? What we have, though, is a 7 or 8 step ticker box that says, prove that you've acted in someone's best interest. And so you feel almost as when you're giving advice to a client that your first obligation is to make sure ASIC's happy, and then you worry about whether the client can be happy. And that's probably a fear a lot of advisors have had. I remember when I started, FSRA just started, and I was so fearful of, if I didn't give my FSG out on time, I get 6 months jail. I still feel this now, right? And so it's the same with, I think initially most advisors, and probably licensees as well, will have that fear factor that even though it's been removed, we'll still do it for a little while. But then you'll start seeing, the brave buffalo crosses the water and they'll start making changes. And we'll get back to a genuine client-first mentality, which is this in the client's best interest? Let's do it. Let's not worry about what box ticking we need to go through first. Let's make sure that that's what we're doing. So we're hoping that modernisation comes through and allows advisors to spend less time on compliance tick boxes and just evidencing that they've done the right thing and just doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're trained as a professional, treat us like a professional. Yep.
And we've heard that right? So we've gone through, we've taken the pain, we've lost half our numbers. But if you think about it now, we've met all the hallmarks of a profession. We're ethical, we're educated, we're examined, we're experienced, right? We've got to meet all those criteria. And with that should come the privilege of professional judgment as well. Yeah. So that's sort of the streamline. In terms of consent, we have had fee consent come in that has simplified a lot around opt-in and FDSs and the like, or fee disclosure statements. But what we haven't had is a mandating to use the one consent form. And if you think back to what we had with AML CTF, we had the one form that everyone accepts, and that's great. Well, we need that, and particularly in a digital form, for fee consent, because every product's going to require their own, right? And we're already seeing it without direction. Everyone will just go and build their own. They'll have their interpretation of what the law requires, build their own. And from an advisor's point of view, we're just filling in different forms again. And so we just want filling one form, do it once, like a one-to-many approach.
Yep. And to get it unified across all the platforms and make sure that it's digital as well. And let's just smooth the process a little bit, even though we're still going to be getting consent, but just doing it in a much more efficient way than it's possible now across the different platforms. Will all have their own forms, and it's all often hard copy as well. So the other point on your top 5 priorities at the FAAA, and I say your priorities, but really they're our priorities, the whole profession's priorities, is the call for a razor gang to cut red tape. It's an interesting one because there is so much red tape. The profession has moved beyond the legislation. The legislation was built for a profession of 20 years ago or longer, and you talked FSRA, and you look back at what the requirements of an SOA are and the proving that we're doing the right thing by clients. A lot of it was built around this idea there was conflicts built in. And so you had to prove that you were doing the right thing because there's conflicts. And those things have all but been eradicated, if not completely eradicated, by law. And we've been trained to be professional. We've done the education. So what areas of regulation, if you like, do you think are the most in need of pruning? And how do you see that process working in practice? Where's the red tape we want to cut?
Yeah, look, great. SOAs are still number one. And although it was put forward as part of DBFO 2A, we think there's greater scope just to reduce the complexity and the need for statements of advice. And I'd love there to be professional judgment around when an SOA is required, maybe when a much simplified ROA is required, using things like materiality and stuff like that. I often use these examples where I remember he's now about to have his 21st birthday, but my nephew Mitch came to me, he was 15, got his first job at the local supermarket, and Uncle Dave, which super fun should I choose? Well, of course, I can't tell him, right? Well, I can, but then I'm breaking however many rules, right? And so I should be able to sit down with him for 15 minutes, talk to him about, okay, this is what happens when markets go up, markets go down, but you've got, 50 years of work, mate. Let's tick the high growth option in a cheap industry fund and away you go. I reckon I could do that in a pretty short phone call or a meeting with the parents. I can't do it. I'm not relied upon to use my judgment. I've got to go and document the whole process and think about, broad circumstances and all those sorts of things. Whereas really quite a simple question, but I can't give a simple answer. So I would love greater valuing of that professional judgment, particularly around statements of advice. I think the code of ethics needs reviewing and the language that's used in there. And you talk more about consent, and clients should know what they pay. And, Standard 6 talks about clients should know and should be fair and honest, and completely agree. But then it's mandated to go in various forms. Like we put in our SOA, we put in our fee consent form. Shouldn't it just be the client should know? Now, whether it's in an SOA, whether it's in a fee consent form, whether it's in an annual contract, whether it's in a whatever, as long as the client knows what they're paying, why are we prescribing what method that they know by? And so just the repetition that we have where we're doing multiple documents for the same thing. And Rob, I'm sure you've had this with the client. They go, am I paying this fee again? And you go, no, you're not paying again. You're just signing off on it again. They go, why? You have to shake your head and you go, I don't know why, but we just have to.
Yep.
And so just that repetition of documents would love to go through, and then fixing the language in some of the code of ethics, because I think in principle, the code of ethics should have been the biggest free kick to advisors going, because I'm yet to meet anyone, again, who thinks we shouldn't have a code of ethics, right? We absolutely should, and it should be principles based. And that's what should govern the way that we operate. But you've got this principles based, and then you've got other legislation within mandates, into the minutia of what you need to do. And sometimes it's competing, right? So what do you do when you've got two requirements that actually compete?
Yeah, well, that's right. You've got to say principles-based guidance through the code of ethics, and then you've got prescriptive-based legislation to follow to the letter. So those things are at times at odds, and certainly the prescriptive nature of the way in which you deliver advice is what makes it significantly more challenging and costly to deliver advice to more Australians. So yeah, couldn't agree more. And let's go to this other one that's kind of been around now for a few years since we've seen the significant drop in advisor numbers. And I've seen a few suggested ideas here around how to reverse the trend of attracting new talent to the profession. What's the FAAA's approach to this question?
Yeah, look, the short answer is there's no silver bullet, right? And we've got another cliff coming up January next year when the education requirements kick in. So we're not quite sure of the numbers, but we'd expect there'd be another fall off at that point. And that's probably the last of it, the last of the, point of a term, bloodletting that's happening with the profession. From a FAAA point of view, our numbers have absolutely dropped as a result, but I think we fared pretty well because most of our members have already had a journey towards education. It hasn't been new to them. So begrudgingly, we've all had to go and do something, but that principle of going to do education hasn't been that bad. But by and large, our numbers have fared pretty well, but we've still felt the pain as well. So I mentioned there's not a silver bullet. So we've got to get into more universities, and we spend a lot of time doing this. The challenge is the education standards are so prescriptive that it's hard for universities to make money running the courses, right? And even things like just wanting to change the name of one of the units, it's not allowed because then it's not FASEA approved, what was known as FASEA approved. So, there's a lot of work we do in there, and then talking to students as well. What's really interesting, Rob, you might recall when you do your commerce degree, often your first year is just a common core. And so you're doing a bit of accounting, a bit of law, a bit of property, a bit of finance, a bit of everything, right? And it's not just getting kids out of school knowing about financial planning. It's actually sometimes targeting those who are doing the common core units and getting their personal finance or financial planning into that common core, or at least one of the electives in that first year. Because often students do that and they go, wow, this is actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I want to do more of this. This is great. Well, how do we do more of this? And I'm going to pick on accountants mainly because my father's a chartered accountant. I love the fact that with financial planning, we're looking through the windscreen of the car. We're looking forward. We're thinking about what's coming ahead, as opposed to looking through the rearview mirror about what's happened. And I love having that conversation about, controlling the controllables, what's actually important to you and looking forward. So I think it's an attractive profession. There's certainly demand for numbers. So if you're looking about, are you going to get a job at the end of it? Absolutely. I think getting some back who have left, if we can get regulation down and, that frustration of what we're doing, if we can get some back, I think that would be great. Skill migration is, another arrow. It's not going to be the panacea. We're not expecting to have thousands and thousands of migrants coming in being financial planners, but if we can get some, that would be great. We're also establishing a project, hoping to launch pretty soon, called Advocacy, which is helping PY candidates and firms get PY through that process as well, because we know that can be complicated for both the candidate and for the business, particularly if they're a small business, and making sure that that's not a big of a cost drain on businesses on the way through.
Yeah. The other idea I've heard to help reverse this trend of advisor numbers is just making it more available to commerce graduates, finance graduates. So this was a proposal that I think that former Minister Jones even put up before the election. And I'd seen it somewhere else as well. Keith Cullen, I think, who's the head of WT Financial Group, had also said it on LinkedIn at one point that this makes so much sense because they might still have to do some additional post-grad units, but they're actually in a finance-related course. So rather than having to walk a narrow path, which is particularly a financial planning degree, let's give them a path to actually, because so many of the young people that have joined our firm, I said, how did you come across financial planning? What makes you want to be a financial planner? And they were doing a economics degree or they're doing a finance degree. And they said, I did the personal finance unit. I really liked it. And I thought, this is something I really enjoy. And that was how they encountered the idea of financial planning. So the fact is they come out and they still then got to go and do 8 graduate diploma units instead of, because it's a related degree. Yeah. So changing the way that's approached and saying, well, they've actually done a very broad finance degree. Let's give them a 4-unit postgrad pathway to getting to be an advisor and get the qualifications with the ethics associated with that. And so to me, that seems like a pretty logical choice and a fairly easy decision to take. Did you get a sense from the former Minister Jones and perhaps whether this was something that's likely to be passed in this next term of Parliament?
Well, it's been proposed already, so that's from a legislative sense. So I think there was broad support and package that actually came through from Minister Jones. I'll admit this is probably not my area of strength in terms of dates and that or when it was launched, but we don't want to lower standards. Absolutely not. We don't want to go back to a diploma level, but there needs to be more flexible standards, which, as you said, you've come from an accounting degree, an economics degree. Why are you going and doing the whole, almost the whole lot again? Why not just, pick out, you need to do these 4 units to top yourself up or whatever it might be. So I think there's broad agreement. Again, universities are probably the challenge there because they've then got to potentially go, well, how do they build it to make that happen? This is where I talk about the complexity of stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
It's all well and good to say it makes sense, but who's then going to teach that and how are they going to make money out of it? And if they've just invested in financial planning courses, are they going to invest in this as well, right? So, but that's been proposed. I'm not sure where that's at from a legislative point of view, whether it's been passed or not or when it's going to be on, but I don't think it was overly controversial.
Okay. I've got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
Second last question. From your perspective, what would a successful term look like for the financial planning profession under this new government? And what are the non-negotiables as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, so look, rolling out the principle of QAR, which is now DBFO, which is simplifying the documentation and allowing advisors to do what they do best, which is help their clients achieve their goals and not fill in paperwork. If I think about the rationalisation of SOAs and best interest duty, I just think being able to give a simple answer to a simple question, that would be success.
Like your nephew. Yeah.
Like my nephew, or, use another example, client called up and they just work for the electoral commission, so they've got $200 of super, like where do they put it? Like those sorts of things where they don't have an existing accumulation account because they're retired, I've got to give them advice, right? Like for something so immaterial. So I'd love for that to come through. Where we draw the line in the sand, and if we think about the 2A, complex advice should be reserved for trained professionals, 100%. So we don't know what the plan is for the new class of provider that might come out, but ultimately complex advice, which is things like retirement advice and transition to advice, because it has such a flow-on effect on cash flow, tax, estate planning, social security, all those sorts of things. It's not as simple as I've got $1,000, I'll make a co-contribution or not. You get it wrong, it has such a lasting impact. So making sure that complex advice stays the domain of the trained professional. And we've put in our submission as well, we don't think that should be collectively charged. We don't think complex advice should be collectively charged as well. Simple advice, we get it, we understand. Simple question, simple answer, but certainly not for complex. And then to your point, and if I don't know if you follow Formula One, Rob, but you've got, Piastri and Norris, 1 and 2 all the time. Who's going to be 1, who's going to be 2? It's hard because DBFO and CSLR are so 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And it's like, depending on what releases come out, which one we want. So solving CSLR, solving it so that our members and our advisors know they're not up for 12 grand a year, that they're going to be up for $600 a year fixed, maybe indexed or whatever. Having that solved, and then the implementation of DBFO, that would be success over the next 3 years.
For sure. I'll put Piastri and CSLR in the pole position, from my perspective, but because it's an explicit cost and it's out of hand already and needs quickly to be addressed. Yeah, Norris in second, being DBFO and getting the reduction in implicit cost of delivery of advice through the paperwork we've got to digest and put in front of our clients to get the job done. So final question, David, you've got a blank check and full government support. What would be on your personal wish list to improve the accessibility and sustainability of quality financial advice for Australians?
Probably it's not explicitly around the cost, but I think this would actually deliver it. I would love for financial advice to be self-regulating. Now, I don't think in practicality we're going to get there tomorrow. Our vision is to have a level of co-regulation where maybe we control education standards or something like that in the not too distant future. But every other profession controls its own standards. What do we expect of one another to be able to give a professional experience to consumers? And I think if we can control our education, we can control our discipline, we can control what educations require, what documentations and standards we expect when we engage with clients, I think we can deliver that efficiently, as opposed to being set by potentially those who don't really know what our profession does very well. And so I would love, just from a professional recognition point of view, a level of self-regulation. Now, I'm not set up for it tomorrow, but a blank check to create that, that's what I would love.
Okay, so you'd be asking the government of the day to trust us, to actually believe that we can self-regulate and look after our own and make sure that people who are doing the wrong thing are discovered and the clients are made whole if they need to be through the inactions or the inadequacies of the advice they've received. So, yeah, self-regulation seems like a distant prospect because I'm not sure yet we've gained the trust of any government completely, but this is the Trusted Advisor podcast. So let's hope that day comes. And I really appreciate taking the time, Dave, to have a chat to us today and giving us an update on what we can hope to see in this re-elected Albanese government. And may you continue to do the great work you and Sarah and George and Phil and the like are doing at FAAA. I don't think, in my experience, I've been going around since the mid to late 90s. I've never seen us better represented than we are today. So for all the work you and the team are doing, we thank you with great appreciation and we look forward to more positive change for our profession. And so David Sharpe, thank you for joining me today on the Trusted Advisor podcast.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for tuning into the Trusted Advisor. I hope today's conversation brought you new insights and inspiration for growing your business. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, leave a review and share it with others in the industry. And don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn for updates on future episodes. Until next time, keep building trust, embracing innovation and driving success in your practice.